Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a point in every human life when the pursuit of greatness collides with the quiet, unspoken truths of the heart, when logic and reason, the very things that built our civilization, begin to tremble before the force of something far more ancient, far more unpredictable emotion. We like to believe that intelligence rules our lives, that data, equations, and systems are the pillars of progress. But behind every revolutionary idea, behind every world-changing moment, there's always something deeply emotional, something raw, unseen, and profoundly human. We often forget that every innovation, every leap forward, is born from a place of inner conflict, that the desire to create is inseparable from the pain of feeling misunderstood. The emotional truth, the one so many refuse to confront, is that what drives us to greatness is rarely peace. It's longing. It's the ache of imperfection. It's the quiet voice that whispers, "You are not enough yet," even when the world applauds. Think about it. Every breakthrough in history came from someone wrestling with something deeply personal. The scientist who felt unseen. The artist who feared irrelevance. The entrepreneur who built empires to silence self-doubt. We chase mastery not because we want to conquer the world, but because we want to understand ourselves. That's the paradox of human progress. Our inventions are the mirrors of our emotional wounds. The mind and the heart are not separate entities. Neuroscience has shown us this again and again. The limbic system, the seat of emotion, fires before our prefrontal cortex even begins to analyze. Emotion leads, logic follows. What that means is that every choice we make, every risk we take begins with feeling. Even the most rational mind is guided by emotion long before reason takes the stage. The irony is that those who claim to be ruled by logic are often the ones hiding from their own emotional truths. And yet, we live in a time that glorifies intellect but dismisses vulnerability. We measure success by productivity, not presence. We reward the loudest voices, not the most honest ones. But if you look closely at the people who've changed the world, the scientists, the innovators, the dreamers, you'll find a common thread. They are not fearless, they are constantly afraid. They're afraid of failure, of loss, of not being enough. But they learn to make peace with that fear. They learn to use it as fuel. What if emotion is not the enemy of reason, but its origin? What if the thing we call genius is simply emotional sensitivity channeled through logic? When someone feels more deeply than most, they see connections others can't. They imagine solutions that seem impossible, because to them, impossibility is just an emotional illusion. In neuroscience, we study how the human brain reacts under pressure. High achievers often exhibit intense emotional patterns, heightened amygdala activity, overactive reward circuits, a constant oscillation between euphoria and exhaustion. It's not that they're more stable, it's that they've learned to operate within chaos. The truth is, many of the greatest minds are driven by loneliness. Loneliness sharpens focus. It isolates thought from noise. It creates an inner vacuum that demands to be filled with creation, with meaning, with purpose. But here's the part people don't like to talk about. That loneliness doesn't go away when success arrives. In fact, it often deepens. The higher you climb, the fewer people understand you. You build machines that connect billions, yet feel disconnected yourself. You lead revolutions in technology, yet quietly yearn for someone to see beyond your accomplishments, to see you. This is the emotional truth that most innovators, thinkers, and leaders don't want to admit. The drive to change the world often begins as a desperate attempt to heal something within. We code, we build, we launch, not just because we believe in the future, but because the present feels incomplete. We chase the infinite because the finite hurts too much. When I talk about human progress, I don't just see blueprints and algorithms. I see emotions translated into systems. The spaceship is a metaphor for escape. The electric car is a metaphor for redemption. Artificial intelligence is a metaphor for self-understanding. Every invention humanity builds is a reflection of an emotional need disguised as logic. And yet, even with all our breakthroughs, we struggle to understand the simplest truth of all, that emotion itself is intelligence. Our capacity to feel deeply, to empathize, to love, to grieve, to yearn. These are not weaknesses, they are advanced features of consciousness. The brain evolved emotion long before it evolved reason. Emotion is not a glitch, it's the operating system. But somewhere along the way, we forgot that. We taught our children to hide their feelings, our leaders to suppress them, our thinkers to dismiss them as irrational. And in doing so, we created a world full of disconnected geniuses, brilliant minds with no emotional compass. We built technology that can simulate empathy, but forgot how to feel it ourselves. When I studied the neural responses of people who take extraordinary risks, I noticed something striking. Their brains register fear just like everyone else's. The difference is what happens next. In most people, fear paralyzes decision-making. In innovators, it becomes an amplifier. The fear doesn't vanish, it transforms into momentum. The body produces dopamine and adrenaline, and the brain learns to associate fear with excitement instead of paralysis. That's not biology, it's emotional reprogramming. We can all learn that skill. Emotional mastery is not about suppression, it's about translation. Taking chaos and turning it into creation. Taking pain and turning it into progress. When you stop resisting your emotions, you begin to harness them. That's how empathy becomes innovation. That's how heartbreak becomes art. But let's be honest, emotional truth is uncomfortable. It demands that we admit the parts of ourselves we'd rather hide. The jealousy, the insecurity, the yearning to be seen, the quiet disappointment in ourselves. Yet that discomfort is where growth begins. No invention, no discovery, no masterpiece was ever born in comfort. Sometimes I think about how differently we'd live if we treated emotion like data, something to be studied, not suppressed. Imagine if every emotional breakdown was analyzed like a software crash. What triggered it? What system overloaded? What needs to be debugged, not in the mind, but in the heart? Because here's the hidden reality: the human heart is the most advanced piece of technology in existence. It processes billions of emotional inputs every day, makes micro decisions faster than any AI, and encodes experiences with such nuance that even the most advanced neural networks can't replicate it. Emotion gives meaning to data. Without emotion, intelligence is sterile. Without vulnerability, ambition becomes addiction. That's why, at the core of every great vision, there's always a hidden emotional story. The story of someone who felt powerless once and decided never to feel that way again. Someone who loved deeply and lost. Someone who was told they couldn't and did anyway. Science tells us that memory is not stored as data, but as emotion. Every moment you remember is not recalled because of what happened, but because of how it felt. Emotion is what encodes reality into meaning. And meaning, in turn, is what gives us purpose. But purpose, too, comes with pain, because the deeper your purpose, the greater your emotional vulnerability. You can't change the world without being changed by it. You can't lead without being misunderstood. You can't love deeply without risking heartbreak. That's the paradox of emotional truth. It hurts, but it heals. And maybe that's the truth that most people don't want to hear. That the path to greatness is not paved with confidence, but with emotional honesty. The people who change the world are not the ones who feel invincible. They're the ones who learn to move forward despite their fragility. You see, when emotion meets intellect, something extraordinary happens. The brain begins to synchronize thought and feeling, logic and intuition, precision and compassion. That's when genius is born. Not in the absence of emotion, but in its mastery. That synchronization between thought and feeling is where human brilliance reaches its highest form. It's where intuition begins to sound like logic, and logic begins to feel like love. You've probably experienced it before, in those rare moments when everything just clicks. When you're creating, building, discovering, and suddenly the universe feels like it's whispering the answers. That isn't luck. That's coherence. Your emotional and cognitive networks are firing in perfect harmony, and for a brief moment, you experience what we might call flow. Neuroscience calls it the transient hyperfrontality state. a condition where your brain's inner critic goes silent. Your sense of time distorts. You lose yourself in the task. The boundaries between self and purpose dissolve. What's fascinating is that this state, which feels so divine, is entirely biological. It's your brain letting emotion and logic dance together without judgment. It's not chaos, it's perfect order. But that state doesn't come easily. It requires surrender, it requires emotional courage. You cannot enter flow by forcing control, you enter it by letting go. The same way you can't hear a symphony if you're too busy analyzing every note. You can't experience your full potential if you're constantly resisting how you feel. I've often wondered why we're so afraid of our emotions, why we label them as weaknesses instead of guidance systems. Every emotion we experience is data. Fear tells us where we're stretching too far or not far enough. Sadness shows us what we've lost and what we value. Anger reveals injustice. Joy reminds us of alignment. Yet we've been taught to categorize these signals into good and bad, instead of decoding what they're actually trying to say. Imagine if we lived in a world where emotional literacy was taught as rigorously as mathematics. Imagine if children were trained not just to calculate, but to feel consciously, to identify the texture of sadness, the vibration of excitement, the pattern of guilt, the rhythm of love. What kind of adults would that produce? Innovators who not only build new systems but understand the human cost and beauty behind them. Leaders who can both think strategically and connect emotionally. That's the future we're missing. You see, emotion isn't a distraction from innovation. It's the blueprint of it. Every product, every invention, every revolution began with an emotional question. What if it didn't have to be this way? What if there's a better way to live, connect? And that question always arises from empathy. Without empathy, progress becomes exploitation. Without compassion, intelligence becomes dangerous. The most advanced form of intelligence is not IQ, it's EQ, emotional intelligence. The ability to feel deeply and act wisely. The ability to understand that behind every algorithm there's a heartbeat, behind every data set there's a story, behind every decision there's a person who will be affected. Let me share something from a neuroscience experiment that still haunts me. We measured brain activity in people making moral decisions, scenarios involving life, risk, or empathy. When subjects made choices purely from logic, the brain's prefrontal cortex lit up, but the limbic system, the seat of empathy, stayed quiet. When they made compassionate choices, both regions lit up together. But when they ignored empathy repeatedly, something changed. The brain began to rewire itself. The neural pathways for empathy weakened. The mind adapted to cold calculation. It's as if the brain said, if you won't use this feeling, I'll stop offering it to you. That's what's happening in our world right now, a collective emotional numbness. We've become so obsessed with optimization that we're losing our capacity to feel. We track our steps, our calories, our metrics, but not our hearts. We quantify everything except what makes us human. We celebrate efficiency, but rarely stillness. We praise productivity, but ignore presence. We've built machines that can outthink us, but not outfeel us. And yet, the emotional truth remains without emotion. Our intelligence collapses into meaninglessness. If we truly want to advance as a species, we must learn to integrate, not separate. The next frontier of progress is not external, it's internal. The real space race is not to Mars or beyond, it's into the uncharted universe of our own consciousness. When you look at a galaxy, you're seeing a reflection of your own mind. Neural networks and star systems follow the same fractal patterns. The micro mirrors the macro, which means that understanding emotion isn't just self-help, it's cosmology. The way you treat your emotions is the way humanity treats its future. Suppress them, and you create black holes of disconnection. Honor them, and you ignite stars of possibility. There's a reason why so many innovators, artists, and visionaries oscillate between genius and despair. Their emotional range is immense. They feel everything, failure, joy, loss, all more intensely than most. The same sensitivity that allows them to perceive the unseen also exposes them to deeper pain. Their genius isn't immunity from emotion, it's immersion in it. But immersion without understanding leads to burnout. When emotion isn't managed, it consumes. That's why so many bright minds fall into cycles of obsession and exhaustion. They confuse drive with healing. They think if they achieve enough, the inner ache will stop. But it doesn't. Because the achievement isn't what the emotion wanted. It wanted acknowledgement. It wanted connection. Sometimes I wonder how many of our greatest inventions were quiet cries for help. The airplane, maybe a longing for freedom. The internet, a longing for connection. Artificial intelligence, a longing for understanding. Every machine is an emotional metaphor wearing a technological disguise. And perhaps the emotional truth we don't want to face is this: we build machines to fix the parts of ourselves we don't know how to heal. But what if healing is the next revolution? What if emotional intelligence became the foundation of technology, business, and society? Imagine devices that don't just respond to commands but to compassion. Imagine organizations where empathy is a metric of success. Imagine cities designed not just for efficiency, but for emotional well-being. We already have the tools. What we need is the will to feel again. The question isn't can we build it, we can. The question is should we build it and why? The emotional why is everything. Without it, technology becomes detached from humanity. With it, technology becomes an extension of empathy. You see, emotional truth doesn't live in the mind. It lives in the space between us. It's in the way we look at each other, in the pauses between words, in the vulnerability we show when we admit, I don't know, but I want to understand. There's an extraordinary study about mirror neurons, the cells that fire not just when we act, but when we observe someone else acting. When you see someone smile, your brain's motor cortex prepares to smile back even if you resist it. When you see someone in pain, your nervous system echoes their distress. We are, quite literally, wired for empathy. Our brains are mirrors. And when we lose connection with emotion, we lose the ability to reflect one another's humanity. That's why emotional truth matters. Not because it's poetic, but because it's biological. Connection is survival. Isolation is entropy. The body decays faster in loneliness than in physical illness. The immune system weakens, the brain shrinks, the genes for inflammation activate. Loneliness isn't just sad, it's fatal. And it's spreading silently in a world that has never been more connected. Maybe that's why the most advanced future won't be defined by the next machine we build, but by how deeply we remember to feel. The heart and mind are not rivals, they are partners in evolution. Emotion gives reason purpose. Reason gives emotion direction. Together, they make consciousness possible. So what does this mean for us, standing here now? It means that the next great revolution won't come from silicon or steel. It will come from the human spirit remembering what it's made of. It will come from people who dare to integrate feeling with thinking, empathy with action, love with innovation. The emotional truth we don't want to admit is also the one that can set us free, that our strength is born from our sensitivity, that the future of intelligence is emotional, that the most powerful technology on this planet still beats inside the human chest. And maybe, just maybe, the most radical act left in this century is to feel deeply in a world that has forgotten how. Because emotion isn't weakness. It's the signal that says we're still alive. It's the reminder that behind every invention, behind every dream, behind every pulse of progress, there is a heart that dares to care. The audience falls silent for a moment. So feel fiercely. Let your emotions be your map, not your enemy. Let them guide your logic, not cloud it. Because the day we stop feeling is the day we stop evolving. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the emotional truth no one wants to admit, but everyone needs to hear.